Another view now on the killing. Looks to me like an assassination of the Group Divisional Head for Group and Forensic Accounts in Ekurhuleni, Mpho Mafole. You saw what the City of Ekurhuleni could tell us just a moment ago. Dr. Ugljesa Radulovic is the Senior Postdoctoral Research Fellow at the University of Johannesburg, specializes in looking at issues around corruption and whistleblowing. Dr. Radulovic, good afternoon. I mean, when we see a killing like this, I mean, it looks almost textbook. I hate to say it. It looks like a deliberate attack, an assassination. And we've seen cases like this before.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Stephen. Absolutely. The first thought that comes to mind is a repetition of the Babita Deakaran case. And it's alarming because the second question I ask is what sort of propinquity do these wrongdoers hold with the criminal underworld? That is, how do they both contact and hire these assassins in assassinations that are now starting to mimic Martin Scorsese films?
The thing is, there must be ways that we can keep whistleblowers safe, and we know some very public whistleblowers who haven't been kept safe. Some of them have never got what they lost from actually telling people the truth, and I'm talking about some of them who testified at the Zondo Commission, for example.
Absolutely. There should be ways, but we have a very weak legislation. South Africa passed the Protected Disclosures Act in 2000, which was very flawed at the time. And it was amended by way of the Protected Disclosures Amendment Act in 2017, which still holds numerous loopholes. It has extended protection in some senses, that it accounts for protection for both former and current employees in both the private and public sectors. But there's a lot of things that it doesn't address. The one big area for me where it's very flawed, it prohibits retaliation against whistleblowers. However, there's no imposing of penalties for retaliation against whistleblowers. And, retaliation is very varied. It doesn't only have to include assassination or assassination attempts, but still, that's one of the very big flaws. And then, of course, there's a matter of implementing that legislation.
I mean, there's so many other things. I mean, you mentioned the Babita Deakaran case, and it's the kind of symbol of what happens when someone tries to blow the whistle. So from what we know, from what we understand, from very important reporting by News 24, we know that this seems to be linked, I can't say this as a judge might, to what was happening in Tembisa Hospital. We know that money was made from Tembisa Hospital for a long time after the assassination. The people who pulled the trigger may be in jail. We still don't legally know who was really behind it. And if you saw what happened to Babita Deakaran, I wouldn't blow the whistle. I don't know if I would be brave enough, frankly.
No, I agree with you, Stephen, is that they've arrested now the trigger pullers, but we don't know who the mastermind is, and, being shot in a rain of bullets. And like, as you rightly said, is that money was still being siphoned through that PPE scam. And it's a question of how, but, there still are brave people out there that do go and blow the whistle. That, I also think that this case with Mpho was a case of him being complying with his role obligations, if I look at it as a sociologist, and that he hadn't yet enacted the role of a whistleblower, because we don't know, as your previous interview, and you were really asking the right questions in what it was that he was investigating, and whether he was going to make that information public or what was going to happen with that information would have been very interesting. But auditing can lead to whistleblowing, and I think the two are somehow or inextricably related, actually.
We have seen, I think it was the previous Auditor General, Kimi Makwetu, but it may well have been also during the time of the current Auditor General, Tsakani Maluleke, in which they've said they've had to have, they found that their auditors who have a duty and obligation, it's actually spelt out in the law what they have to do, and that they've been threatened. I think at one point some of them had to get guards. I think it may have been in KwaZulu-Natal, I'd have to check that. But are we seeing that people who play that role, so auditors, people who provide the checks, who ensure financial accountability, more and more are coming under fire in this way? I mean, the idea that all people from an Auditor General's office need protection, I find very, very scary.
Absolutely, it seems to be. I mean, that seems to be the case. I would have to look at more evidence, look at some quantitative evidence, and see the frequency of reporting, or what their reports look like, and what the retaliation looks like, or the frequency of retaliation, and maybe do a correlation. But it seems to be, at this sort of face value, as I'm looking at it now, it's alarming. I mean, there's tax practitioners as well. If you think back on someone like Johan van Lockerenberg's disclosure with SARS, in the state capture saga, he also faced Okay, he was lucky to walk away relatively okay, except for the fact that he's had a break-in and he was physically assaulted in one case, and also in instances that are very difficult to decipher because, like you said with your previous interviewee, what is the nature of what he was working on? A, and B, was the assassination related to it?
There's another case around all of this, another way to look at all of this. So we have these networks. I mean, you could call it patronage, you could call it corruption. But certainly money is flowing from government, councils in this case, sometimes metros, to actual people who are taking this money, receiving this money illegally. They're not providing value for money. And I'm being very polite when I put it like that. There are other ways to describe it. How do you break up those networks? We've had this problem in our councils for many, many years. I mean, you can go back to 2007, and there's a famous quote by Kgalema Motlanthe before he was president, in which he said that famously, almost every project is created with the idea of how do we benefit from it. That was the way he put it. I'm paraphrasing the quote. But I mean, how do you then break up these criminal networks? It's very hard to do in any society.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Well, there's two parts to it. There's a corrupt and a corrupted. If we can look at it like that. And those private individuals seem to be corrupting the corrupted. And I think it's policing would be an ideal mechanism. But you would, I believe, have to first target the corruptors and see or sort of trace the origin of these illicit flows. And I think that's what the auditors are actually doing. They're trying to trace origin and directions of these illicit paper flows or whatever sort of paper trail they're trying to establish. But it's difficult. These networks seem to be working very effectively. I mean, the fact that today we have no clue what the assassination is about, why Mpho was killed, is alarming in itself.
I mean, we know the Hawks, for example, also don't have the manpower, the number of investigators they're supposed to have. Last time I checked, I think Godfrey Zabia, the now former head of the Hawks, as he was leaving in his sort of post in interviews, suggested that, in fact, still there's around 50% vacancy rate. In a society in which we keep claiming, leaders keep saying we're going to fight corruption, and you don't have 50% of your posts filled, I mean, that makes me question that commitment, I'm afraid.
It's disastrous. There's been calls or recommendations for another chapter in our institution, an anti-corruption one, which would coordinate efforts further. And I suppose they would coordinate with civil society as well as independent media and these people that bring issues to the fore. So be it whistleblowers, auditors. Maybe that's another mechanism we could look at. But these are new statistics to me. So the fact that we have 50% vacancy in the Hawks is disastrous.
Dr. Ugljesa Radulovic, thank you very much indeed. Senior Postdoctoral Research Fellow at the Department of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg. Just a reminder of how difficult it is and sometimes how brave auditors need to be.